Good evening and welcome to The Holistic Perspective. Tonight we're going to talk about one of the very core skills necessary to help people healing, and that is empathetic listening. And empathetic listening is a very, very important skill. Even if you're not trying to help people heal emotionally, it's a good skill to have just as a health care provider in general, because it's something that people don't get and they really, really need. Doctors don't provide it. You don't get it in the hospital. You might get it if you go into counseling or whatnot, but still, all in all, it's something that's in very short supply and yet is in very big demand. So I want to start off by telling a little personal story. When I was young, something was bothering me at school, and I don't remember now what it was at all, but I do remember what happened when I was home, and I blurted out to my parents, "I don't like school." I immediately got a very lengthy lecture about the importance of school, and that school was important, and you had to da-da-da, and blah, 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 blah. Nobody ever bothered to listen and figure out what was bothering me about school. I just got the lecture about the importance of school. And that really bothered me because it really wasn't what was really bothering me. And I have learned that that what I did and what I was doing as a teenager is something that most of us learn to do as we grow up, because we don't get heard and because we don't feel like we're really getting the care that we want. We tend to throw out something that tests whether people are going to listen or not. And if people react to the first thing that we say, we usually just shut up and realize they're not going to listen to us and quit trying. Oftentimes what is really bothering a person is much deeper than what appears to be on the surface. So also I remember a time when something happened and I came home and there'd been a problem. I'd been out on an event, and before I could even explain what had happened, my parents launched into a 1-hour lecture to me, and I never let me get a word in edgewise. And when I finally did get a chance to say what had happened, they realized that they had totally misjudged the situation, and that's very common. We often just going with our first reaction and never taking the time to really listen or understand what's underneath things, we often misinterpret and so forth. So we need to learn to listen first, then speak. Some wise people have pointed out God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, which means we should listen twice as much as we talk. But most often people really don't take time to listen or understand another person before they chime in with their advice, their solutions, their counsel, their help, their comments, or rebuttals, or just talking about their problems. So if we really want to help people, we've got to train ourselves to listen first, and before we try to do anything, to understand what the real problem is. So tonight we're going to talk about some listening skills, and the first listening skill we're going to talk about is listening with your full attention. And the reason why listening with full attention is important is because 90% of all communication is nonverbal. If you only hear words, you miss the meaning. When you listen with your full attention, you're tuning not only your ears to a person, but your eyes and also your heart to really hear them. We're going to talk more about what it means to listen with the heart a little later on in the presentation. But a big part of the reason why it's important to listen with full attention is because meanings aren't in words. In our culture, we have placed so much emphasis on words that words have taken on a life of their own, and we tend to think that that just because we're using words, we're communicating, or just because we're hearing words, we're understanding. But that's not really true, because words are just symbols, and a symbol may mean something different to you than it means to me. And we might use the same word, but it has a totally different subjective meaning inside of us. Now, obviously, when we're talking about concrete objects like an apple or a chair or whatever, that is less of a problem because we all have a pretty good idea of what an apple or a chair is. But when we start talking about abstract concepts like love and goodness or so forth, that's a totally different thing. Those things just don't mean the same thing to everybody. They all have different connotations, and there's also a subjective coloring to all words. So you can't just assume that because you've heard the words you understand the meaning, because the words that a person uses may mean something different to them than they mean to you. I've observed people, by the way, I was an instructor in one of my communication classes in college who taught this, that meanings aren't in words, meanings are in people. And I immediately knew it was true because I've always been a keen observer of people. My son David's even better observer of people than I am. And I would oftentimes observe people having an argument. And many times I found out that they were using the same words to describe two different things. So their argument really wasn't about what they thought they were arguing about. It was over the meaning of the words. Or in some cases, they were talking about the same thing, but arguing over what words describe the thing. And so much of arguing is about words, because if we actually get past the words and we get into what's underneath things, into the feelings, into the human needs and so forth, we're all much more alike than we are different. So to illustrate this, he used this little thing, which I'm going to do right now. One sound can convey multiple meanings. Oh! 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 Oh? Oh? Oh! 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 Okay? You see, one word, one sound, one vowel. Amazing complexity of meaning. That's because most of the meaning is carried in the facial expression and vocal tone, which is saying a lot more than the words. And so if you're not paying attention to that, you're missing the majority of the meaning. Here's another problem that relates to listening with your full intention. And that is, many of you have heard the phrase, we see through a glass darkly. Well, what that really means is none of us actually see the world as it really is. None of us see other people as they really are. We see everything in the world, including the people we're closest to, through a clouded glass that distorts our perception and causes us to misread things. And that dark glass is our beliefs. Our beliefs and our opinions and our prejudices and our judgments, all of which blind our eyes and close our minds because they cause us to interpret what we're seeing through the filter of our own judgments rather than just seeing it as it is and understanding it as it is. Now, unfortunately, most people are not aware that they do this. And because they're not aware that they do this, they have a hard time recognizing that their perceptions are not real. Because when you're seeing things through these distorted lenses of your belief, you honestly believe that what you're seeing is the way it is. And unfortunately, it's not. And so until you start understanding that you are distorting your perception of reality through your beliefs and your judgments and everything, you're going to have a hard time learning to see things clearly, which means you're going to have a hard time listening, really, really listening, because you're too busy analyzing what's being said and interpreting it through your belief systems than you are just accepting it. And so listening with your full attention also means just really trying to understand what's going on inside someone beyond the words they're using and beyond your perceptions of them. So in listening, never assume that you're right. Never assume that your opinion, your perspective on something is the correct one. Always be open to the fact that perhaps you in some ways are not seeing this clearly, that there's part of you that is distorting this, and therefore being open-minded to allowing yourself to be shown that things may be different than you perceive they are. Now, of course, we all want to be heard too. I mean, listening is important, but the reason why listening is important is because everybody wants to be heard. So when we're dealing with trying to listen with people close to us, the only answer to this is that we have to take turns. All too often, we're talking over the top of each other because we're so anxious to be heard that we don't take the time to listen to the other person's perspective. When I was president of the American Herbalist Guild, originally we had, when I got on the board of the American Herbalist Guild, there were 9 people on the board, and everything had to be decided by consensus. And getting 9 people to agree about anything can be a royal pain in the behind. While I was on the board, we amended the bylaws to allow for 5 board members instead of 9, because when operating by consensus, I mean, it makes it a little bit easier, but still even getting 5 people to agree on anything is a difficult task. When I became president, one of the things that I did to be able to move things forward with the board was we met monthly via telephone conference call, whereas before we'd been meeting in person twice a year for a day and a half. And in our conference calls, one of the things that I implemented was a policy similar to what the Native Americans did in what they called a talking stick, where there was a stick, and whoever had the stick had the floor, and you did not interrupt them until they were done. And when they were done, they passed the stick to the next person, and then it was the next person's turn to talk. That way, nobody is talking over the top of anybody, and everybody is getting heard. And so I implemented, I couldn't pass around a talking stick on the phone, but when people would come on the call, I would find out, okay, that person's on the call. I would write their name down on a list, and I would make a list, and I would announce at the beginning of the meeting, here is the speaking order. This is the first person, the second person, third person, fourth person. And I would, when I handed the floor or over to one person, the instructions is that everybody else had to listen until that person was done. And what I do is I go around the circle, so to speak, and let everybody speak their mind. And I would listen very carefully to what everybody said, try to understand everybody's concerns, everybody's points of view, and then I would try to summarize the whole thing, trying to point out the points of where it appeared to me that everybody was in agreement, the issues that we needed to resolve, and then I would open the floor again to, okay, so now let's talk about this and see if we can resolve these things we don't agree on. And a lot of times I would try to propose what I thought would be a solution that would address everybody's concerns. And by doing that, I was able to move the board forward, and we got a lot of things done, and the AHG really moved forward. Now, there were a couple of people who hated that because they got mad that they couldn't interrupt. Someone was talking when they had a question, or they had whatever, or they wanted to talk a point about it, and they didn't want to have to wait their turn. They wanted to be able to engage that person right then and there. By the way, I had a rule that if someone wanted to talk to somebody else about something they had said when it was their turn, they could. Okay, so they could give that person permission, to speak and answer questions or whatever, but they had control of the floor when it was their turn. And one of the people who didn't like that became the president, and she had horrible times at the board meetings because she wanted everybody to be able to chime in and talk over the top of each other, and of course it all turns into arguments and contentions. So if you want to have peace and you want to have peaceful communications in any kind of a relationship, whether it's at the office or whether it's at the at home or in a family or whatever, you've got to implement policies of taking turn. Whose turn is it to talk and whose turn is it to listen? And when it's your turn to listen, you got to listen. Okay. Next point is practicing what we call reflective listening. Now, I first learned about reflective listening from Stephen R. Covey. And this goes back to the personal story I told you in the beginning of this thing. I heard Stephen R. Covey talk in my early 20s. I actually had heard him talk a couple of times before that. But in this particular occasion, he was talking about the importance of listening. And it was a class all on this whole issue of listening. And he said, talked about a kid who goes to their parents and says, "I don't like school." And my whole ears just perked up because I could remember that incident from my childhood. And he says, and then he talked about the parents giving the big lecture about the importance of school, and then he would go back into the mind of the kid and say, kid's going, "Well, that's not really what I wanted to talk about, but if you want to lecture to me about the importance of school, I'll sit and listen, and then I'll just, blah, blah, blah." And he illustrated things that were not listening and things that demonstrated you were listening, and that's where I first learned about the skill of reflective listening and began to practice the skill of reflective listening. So I started practicing reflective listening in my early 20s. One of the things anyway, so let's talk about what reflective listening is. Reflective listening is really a tool that communicates to the other person, "I am listening." It also allows them to correct misperceptions you have. That is, if you have, through that distorted lens of your perception, if you have misunderstood what they meant, then it gives an opportunity for them to clarify it. Which, by the way, is an interesting thing because there have been times when I've been trying to talk to somebody and they'll come back and they'll say, "But you said this," and they'll quote me word for word, and I go, but that's not what I was trying to say. "But you said this, blah, blah, blah." Okay? In other words, they're hung up on the words. They don't really want, and what's usually happening is the way they've interpreted those words was not what I was trying to communicate, but they're hung up on the words, and therefore they're, feeding the words back to me. But if you understand that you never can be sure that even if you heard the words that you understood the meaning, reflective listening gives an opportunity for the person to clarify their meaning. And that's why I start off with the fact that you can't assume that you're right. You have to be willing to try to really listen and understand. When you do reflective listening, it really helps people feel heard. And if you're in a relationship, it's no guarantee that the other person will listen to you, but a person is more likely to listen to you if they feel that you've heard them first. So reflective listening is basically a technique for basically communicating back to the person, "I'm listening, I'm hearing what you said." Now, so let's take the example of the kid saying, "I hate school." So if I sense that there's more to be said, okay, I might just communicate something that says, "Okay, I'm listening." Like, "Go on," or "I'm listening." Okay, go ahead, tell me about it. Okay, that is just an invitation for them to talk more. Now, that's not really a part of reflective listening, but it is a feedback saying, "I'm hearing you," and so forth. Now, obviously, if you say that and you're doing something else and your attention isn't focused or whatever, they'll think, okay, they don't really mean it. But if you turn and you face them and you put your attention on them and show that, okay, I'm ready to hear what you have to say, and then you say that, then that opens the door for them to talk more. Now, actual reflective listening is feeding back to the person what you heard. So the most simple form of that and the least effective form is to parrot, which is to say, so you hate school. That still gives an opportunity to say, I heard the words. Okay, what that says is I heard the words you said. And it allows them to, if they go, well, think, well, I really didn't mean that I hate school, blah, blah, blah. That might open them up to continue talking, and so forth. A more effective technique, especially when, like in what I was doing with the HG, when a person's, given a little spiel about something, is to summarize and reflect back in your own words what you thought they meant. Okay, in other words, what was the meaning of what they said? So that would be saying something like, so you're saying you don't like school. Okay, so I've just rephrased that in my own words or my own language to feedback, did I hear you correctly? Am I getting the meaning of what you said correctly? That's a little better technique, and in business settings and so forth, it's a really good technique. By the way, if in certain Navy military situations, they do this technique where the captain gives the order, the first officer repeats the order verbatim, and then the person who is supposed to execute the order repeats the order verbatim, and then says executing or doing or whatever. The reason that they're doing that, which is a form of reflective listening, is because you can imagine the problem if the person does not hear the order correctly and executes the order incorrectly, but by the order being repeated 3 times, then it basically is acknowledging, yes, I heard the correct words, and giving the opportunity for feedback. So see, this is actually a very practical tool in certain circumstances. However, when you're dealing with trying to help people heal, or you're dealing with interpersonal relationships, just feeding back words or meaning is not enough to be giving true reflective listening, because what most of us really want is not to be intellectually understood, but to be emotionally understood, to feel like somebody has heard or tuned into or listens to or cares about our feelings. So it's much more powerful if in reflecting back what you heard, you also reflect back the emotion that you are sensing coming from the person. So sounds like you're upset about school is feeding back that you're hearing that there's distress around school that this kid is having. Or you sometimes can even just directly feed back the emotion. You sound frustrated, or you sound upset, or you sound hurt, or whatever. Or I sense that you're hurt. That's another way of saying it. This is a really valuable skill in interpersonal relationships, because I've in talking to men about listening to women. Men tend to be very literal in the way they use language and words. In other words, the way male brains tend to focus is we tend to take what's said. It's our first nature to take what's said very literally. So when our wife says, "You never help me," or "You never listen," then our brain goes in and goes, "Well, wait a second. Well, just yesterday I listened to you for an hour. So that's not true." Okay. And then we say, but yesterday I listened to you, blah, blah, blah. And then an argument ensues. Because really, again, most of the time what people are wanting to communicate is their feelings. And they may blurt out words with the vocal tone and the facial expressions and everything else trying to communicate what they're feeling. And if you just respond to the words and don't respond to the emotion that's underneath the words, then you are not going to get a good response. So if if you turn around and use the technique of reflective listening, you never listen to me. You sound upset, and I'm sensing that you need me to listen to you and hear what you have to say. That's reflective listening. In other words, that's feeding back, but it goes beyond just parroting what the person said to trying to tune into what is going on inside of them and feeding that back. And that really helps make connection, which opens up to deepen the conversation. So, as we'll talk about in a minute, Dr. Marshall Rosenberg with Nonviolent Communication has really honed this to a whole new level by pointing out that the feelings also are based on needs, that our feelings are based on needs that are being either met or not met. And so if you can go beyond even mirroring the feelings to guessing what the needs are behind the feelings, which I just did in the example of you don't listen to me. I sense that you're feeling very frustrated and you would like to listen to me. I am feeding back the emotion I'm sensing and guessing at what the need is, you see. And as he points out, even when you guess wrong, the fact that you are listening on that level usually will open up immediately and the person will correct it and say, no, that's not it, blah, 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 blah. And then you guess again, try to understand, feedback the emotion and what the person's needing. So if we were going back to the I hate school thing, you might have said, I'm hearing that you're feeling overwhelmed at school. Like, okay, now that you wouldn't likely pick up on that unless you'd encourage them to talk more. But I might say, I'm so frustrated with this teacher and blah, 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 and all this homework and da-da-da-da-da, and then you tune in and you go, I sense you're feeling overwhelmed and that you're needing some help to get on top of your homework. That is a really, really powerful form of reflective listening. Now, this came up in the other thing, like, okay, sometimes, people are dumping on you or there's stuff going on and you just can't handle it. Well, this isn't technically reflective listening. This is an important skill that Marshall Rosenberg talks about in Nonviolent Communication, of then being willing to drop into your own feelings and needs and just simply communicate that, which could be that, this person is spewing out all this anger and negativity and blah, blah, blah. And you say, I'm feeling very uncomfortable with this situation. I'm kind of tired right now. And I would appreciate it if we could defer this conversation to a time when I'm not so tired and I can give you my better attention. That's a perfectly legitimate response too, but it's not making the other person wrong or attacking what they're saying or judging them that they're some kind of bad person because they've got all these feelings inside of them that they want to dump. Now one of the things that Stephen R. Covey made very clear in this class I took years ago, or this lecture I went to years ago on reflective listening, was that asking questions is not part of reflective listening. So and he went through that scenario. The kid says, I hate school, and he says, why do you hate school? And then he goes off to the side, and the kid thinks, well, I don't really hate school, but since Dad wants to know what I dislike about school, I'll talk about that. But that's not what I really wanted to talk about, because what I really wanted to talk about is the fact that, my girlfriend just broke up with me and blah, blah, blah. Okay, the point again being is that when you start asking questions, you take control of the conversation. You're no longer listening. You're steering the conversation in the direction you want it to go, not in the direction the person who's talking wants it to go. In fact, I was just, thumbing through trying to find a good example of something from one of Marshall Rosenberg's books to give this. And I stumbled upon this thing where he said, the worst thing that you can ask is why. Because asking why really is deeply emotionally upsetting and very judgmental, because you're basically insisting that the person justify themselves to you. Why do you hate school? Okay? Or why are you angry? Or why are you feeling upset? Or why? And besides, one of the things I learned from having young children is the question why is a bottomless pit. Why does this happen? You explain it. Well, why is that so? Then you explain it. Why is that so? Blah, blah, blah. And ultimately, you come to the bottom line answer. What's the bottom line answer? Because that's the way it is. Okay? It just is. Why is not accepting what is and trying to force it to be justified. And so it's really important to resist the temptation to ask questions when you're truly trying to listen. Now, I do realize that, when I'm doing a consult, part of my job is to ask questions in terms of trying to get information I need to try to figure out what's going on with the person. But when I'm doing emotional healing work, or when you're trying to really listen to somebody because they're upset about something or they're trying to express something, asking questions is not a helpful thing to do. In fact, it's much better to do the techniques of reflective listening. Now, there are some limits to reflective listening. Reflective listening by itself is not the end-all and be-all of listening skills. First of all, it can be done mechanically. And Stephen R. Covey basically talked about some kid who had come to him and had just been to see a counselor, and he says, oh, that guy was using reflective listening on me, and I just really, really hated it. And then Stephen R. Covey talked about how he responded to this kid, and he actually used reflective listening in responding to this kid, and he got and the kid felt heard and acknowledged. But the difference is that Stephen R. Covey was using it skillfully, which means he wasn't just parroting back what was being said. He was using it in this more subtle form of feedback, of sensing feelings, sensing needs, sensing things that go beneath that. And of course, if you overdo reflective listening, you don't just sit there and parrot every sentence a person says or comment on everything they say, because then you're interrupting the person's flow of thought. All too often, when we're in a listening situation, we dislike silence. So we want to fill up the silence. We want to interject something, ask something, do something to fill up the silence. But often, just being with someone and being silent and smiling at them and just looking like I'm listening, I'm here for you, is all that you need. And it'll give them a chance to start opening up their thoughts. A lot of times, some of us, this is true for me, I don't know if it's ever true for you, I have a hard time saying what's going on inside of me. But if someone is giving me space and is giving me encouragement, I can dig in there and start trying to figure out how to say it. And even if it's difficult, like I said, sometimes what I'm talking about tonight is difficult for me to put into words. But I have to, formulate or think through things because I'm not used to teaching this stuff. So I highly recommend Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication. And he also has some other books, Being Me, Loving You, Getting Past the Pain Between Us, and The Surprising Purpose of Anger, and some others, all of which are really, really good at teaching this skills of both listening and communicating on a level that gets past the words and into the deeper stuff that helps us connect with people, which is feelings and needs. So his nonviolent communication basically is both for listening and for speaking. And so when you're trying to communicate with someone, you start with observation of facts, and he gets into a big discussion in the book of the difference between judgments and facts and feelings. Most of us don't communicate our feelings or the facts. We communicate our interpretations and judgments and everything of those facts, which again are happening because of the distorted lens through which we see things. So, and instead of saying, I felt hurt when you said this, we say, that was mean. You're mean. Okay, that's not communicating our feelings. That's not communicating the facts. That's an interpretation or a judgment that we are communicating. And of course, when we communicate in judgment, we force the other person into a position where either they have to accept our judgment or defend themselves against our judgment, and that does not facilitate good communication. Of course, a lot of times other people are judging us, and he teaches we can respond either by, when you said this, I felt this way, and it's because I perceived that you were, I perceived it as a sign of disrespect, and I really want to be respected. That's a communication of needs. And then the last part of this is, could you rephrase that in a way that doesn't, make me wrong, but just communicates what you're feeling or something like that. In other words, and he's got great examples of doing this in the book. But you can also do this with listening. I'm going to talk a bit about how you apply observation of facts to listening, because it's a tech I use. Feeding back that you're hearing the feelings that are being said, feeding back that you're, what needs you're sensing, and then instead of chiming in, even when the person is satisfied that you do understand, instead of chiming in and saying, well, here's the solution and this is blah blah blah, why not do what he suggests and say, what do you need? Get them to articulate what it is that they need, what they want. Do they need a hug? Do they just need a little reassurance? Do they need whatever? Then you can give to them exactly what they feel they need, rather than what you think they need or what you interpret they need or what you judge they need or what they, blah blah blah. So it's a really good information, and I don't have time to do this. To get into it fully in this evening, but I showed this in my trauma recovery webinar, that basically when people are telling their story is always their judgment and their interpretation of the facts. Underneath that are the actual events, the actual facts, the things that did happen. But what's really going on is underneath the surface are the feelings and emotions that they haven't dealt with, and the unmet physical and emotional needs, which is why the next skill comes in so importantly, and is a skill that that goes beyond reflective listening, and that's the skill of being able to connect with another person and communicate with them heart to heart. This is a level of communication that goes beyond words, beyond language, directly to feeling to feeling and understanding to understanding. And we are totally capable of listening on this level, meaning that we are totally capable of perceiving directly what is going on inside of a person, even though they may have a hard time expressing it in words. Now, many of you may have attended the workshops I did for Nature Sunshine this past year on the flower essences, and I talked a little bit about this in those workshops. For those of you who weren't in those workshops, I'm going to explain this. Those of you who were, this will be a bit of a review. But when I read this book, The Secret Teachings of Plants, subtitled The Intelligence of the Heart and the Direct Perception of Nature by Stephen Herod Booner, I learned some things that explained what I had been experiencing and helped me understand it and be able to talk about it, because before I really didn't know how to explain what I was experiencing in doing emotional healing work with people. What he explains is the heart generates an electromagnetic field, and it broadcasts this electromagnetic field not only through the body, but it projects that electromagnetic field into the environment. And encoded in that electromagnetic vibration is very complex information about what's going on inside of me, my mood, my thoughts, my feelings. It's really like a carrier wave for a broadcast signal, like a radio or TV station, where the electromagnetic impulse is carrying information. Now, this shouldn't surprise us, because just about every single one of us nowadays carries around one of these little cell phones. And most of them are smartphones, and these little phones can tune in to all kinds of signals and pull down all kinds of data and transmit all kinds of data. Well, our heart can do the same thing. Our heart can not only communicate data electronically, broadcast it, but it also can pick up on electromagnetic data being broadcast by other people or animals or plants or environments in the earth, from the actual, even the elements of the earth, and sense things. Now, when the heart senses and decodes information from the surrounding environment, the heart does not speak in words. The heart does not use language. What information perceived through the heart, which is the spiritual dimension of our being, is communicated to us in feelings and in visual images, meaning we get pictures formed inside our head. So what he explains in this book is this is how native people talk to plants. And I understand that because I've talked to plants before. But the plants don't talk in words. They don't talk in English. They don't speak English. Okay? Instead, what happens is you get a feeling about the plant, or you get images about the plant that communicate information about the plant. Now, sometimes in those images you'll get some kind of verbal thing, or sometimes what will happen is the heart will trigger something like the words of a song that has an emotional connotation. It's beyond words. It has this feeling, this visual image attached with those words. So our hearts are capable of sending information. Our hearts are capable of receiving information. This is really important to understand. And we've all experienced this by accident, meaning there are times when we have gotten in sync with someone on the same wavelength, in the same vibe, and you're just understanding each other in a really, really profound way. Well, whether someone else is understanding you or not on that level, it's entirely possible for you to train yourself to understand them on that level. And so to do this, there are several things you have to do. And the first one is you have to quiet your mental chatter. You have to quiet the mind. The verbal mind, with its constant flow of verbal diarrhea going, and also been called monkey chatter going on in your brain, obstructs your ability to do this. And most of us just cannot shut down that flow of verbal stuff. Now, fortunately, when I was in college, the same professor who taught us that meanings are not in words, meanings are in people, also taught us how to meditate. And I actually started practicing meditation. Now, the kind of meditation he taught us is not a spiritual meditation. It was actually meditation from based on this researcher who did this thing called the relaxation response, which is it's meditation just to relax and quiet your mind and still yourself inside, not with any kind of spiritual connotation, although meditation can be used as a spiritual practice as well. I call prayer talking to God and meditation listening. But nonetheless, what it takes to get the monkey chatter in your brain to quiet down is intense focus on something that basically stops the flow. So Herbert Benson, in his relaxation response book, used the word one. You just repeat the word one, 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 over again, over again, and by holding that single word in your brain, all other thoughts are shut off. That's a good practice discipline to do. I learned I could do it by doing a technique of counting my breathing. In breathing in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, in 2, 3, 4. You get the idea. And the counting became a focus, but then I found that as I continued, I could stop the counting and just focus on the breathing. And as I just concentrated on the breathing, you could become so concentrated or focused on the breathing that you stop thinking in words. But I also learned that you can do this same thing with any point of focus. For instance, you can stare at a candlelight and stare at it so intensely and focus all your mental concentration on just looking at it, just taking it in to the point that it shuts off all thoughts. And this is practicing doing this, practicing learning to quiet your mind is really important, because what you can learn to do then is that means you can focus so intently on another person that you're no longer, that all the monkey chatter in your brain shuts down, because all you care about is hearing what they're saying, tuning into them, understanding them, and you are not like sitting there verbally analyzing things. That's really, really important thing. The second part of this is to connect with someone through your heart. You have to accept them. It's an unconditional acceptance. It's just accepting who they are, what they are, and this is the attitude I took in emotional healing work. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just traumatized. And I'm here to help you work through it. Whatever comes up, I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to criticize you. I'm not going to condemn you. I'm just going to accept you, and I will hold it as a sacred pledge that I will never, that I will not, divulge your private things to other people. And then it's just kind of like you just let your heart tune into that person with your feelings as you're listening to them. But you have to be listening where you're not like verbally engaging in stuff or judging the person. You're just listening and 100% accepting them. And then it's like you can reach out with your heart and feel and sense their heart with your heart. Now, how do you, okay, you got a person, they're angry or they're frustrated or they're negative or they've got all kinds of crap going on. How do you listen to them with this, loving acceptance? You do it by understanding human nature. And this is basically a model of psychology a friend of mine introduced me to. It's a Dr. Sterling Ellsworth who basically used this as a model. We have a public self, and underneath that public self we have a negative self. We have a self where all of our traumas and hurts and wounds and frustrations and everything is. And then underneath that we have a real self. The public self is, I'm going to go on a date, and so I put on my best behavior. I brush my hair and my teeth. I trim my nails. I make sure my shoes look good and everything, and I go out there to present myself as something, Good. Or, you do the same thing if you're teaching the class, or or standing up in front of the group. You're putting on your public self and being, you know, projecting, positivity or whatever it is that you want people to see. However, underneath that, we all have this layer of self where we've got hurts and wounds and pains and frustrations and our own problems and our own need to be heard and so on and so forth. A lot of times, though, that part of us had so many hurts and wounds that, and we're secretly believing, okay, I'm not really very good. I'm not, this, that, the other. I'm trying to be, but I'm not. Okay, that layer of ourselves, we often come to think is really who we are. We're really this bad person trying to be this good person. But the truth of the matter is that what we are inside, our core nature, is we really are good people. I mean, we really are these wonderful, amazing, powerful, spiritual people. And I see that in people. And I, by the way, I see that in people because of a spiritual experience I had where I was basically given that understanding that we have that. There was an analogy I read in a book, and it was based on a true story that I've always liked in this regard, where they said these monks in Southeast Asia were having to move this giant clay Buddha to a new location, and as they were trying to move it, it got cracked. And as one of the monks was, looking at the crack, he noticed a glint of something shiny at the bottom of the crack. And so he chipped it away and found gold. And what they did is they basically found that there was a golden statue of Buddha inside of this clay statue of the Buddha. And they surmised that in a war that had happened sometimes past, that not wanting the golden Buddha to be stolen, they had encased the golden Buddha into a Buddha of clay so nobody would think it was valuable. And so the idea is that we, because we've been criticized and hurt and everything, we encase our real self over with this false self, that the emotional healing is really all about chipping away or discharging that. But this model basically adds another layer to that. Okay, so we think we have this giant clay Buddha, and we gold leaf it to make it look like it's a golden Buddha, and so everybody thinks it's a big giant golden Buddha, and we think it's really a clay Buddha that's disguised as a golden Buddha, when really it is a golden Buddha disguised in a clay Buddha. Anyway, that's the analogy, but the point being is that our authentic self gets layered over by this negative self, and then we try to create this illusionary self that we don't think is who we really are, but actually our public self is closer to our true self than our negative self is. So what really this negative self is it's the traumatized part of us. All of us have been traumatized. All of us have hurts and wounds and pains and times when we felt like we weren't heard or we weren't listened to or we were abused or whatever. And all of that unresolved hurt and pain and problems mask the core of who we really are. And many of us actually start to believe it is who we really are. So when we're listening with our heart, what we are trying to do is listen in faith that underneath this stuff that's going to come out, this anger, this crying, this negativity, this whatever, there really is a good, competent, wonderful individual who's capable of solving their own problems. Now, unfortunately, some people that is so deeply buried that they're just not going to ever be willing, unless something really breaks them and cracks them, to go and make that journey. But if you believe that's inside of them and you see them as traumatized, not as evil, but as traumatized human beings who are acting out, in a negative way because they're traumatized. And it gives you a whole different way of looking at things and being able to have compassion on them. And one of the things I had in emotional healing, and it was one of the core things, is I actually see the person as perfectly capable of solving their own problems. And it's not my job to solve their problems. It's only my job to let them discharge their emotional trauma, to give them an opportunity to go inside and fix what happens. Marshall Rosenberg says that if you believe that other people are responsible for your feelings, and you believe that you're responsible for other people's feelings, that is emotional slavery. And it will burden you, and it'll make it impossible for you to listen empathetically or compassionately to anybody. But if you believe I'm responsible for my feelings and dealing with my feelings, and you're responsible for dealing with your feelings, that actually means I can compassionately and lovingly listen to you struggling with your feelings, because I know how difficult it is for me to struggle with my own feelings. But it doesn't become a burden to me because I don't have to fix it. It's not in my capacity to fix, but it is in my capacity to empathize. Now, one of the techniques that you can do that actually helps you achieve this, and I have done both of these things deliberately, is to synchronize your breathing pattern with the other person's breathing pattern. Now, this works because one of the things I learned in doing emotional healing work was that all emotions have a breathing pattern. So if I start breathing in as the other person is breathing in, and exhale as the other person is exhaling, and I start copying their breathing pattern, exactly breathing as they are breathing, I actually am starting to put myself into the same emotional state that they are in, which allows me to create an empathetic resonance with what there's going on inside of them, which allows me to create that heart connection and feel and sense what's happening inside of them, inside of me. And I can also then come out of that and kind of counter that and help them process their emotions by basically counter synchronizing the breathing. That is, as they exhale, I suck in their energy, I kind of transform it inside of myself, and as I exhale, they inhale. And so what I imagine is that I'm inhaling their negativity, replacing it with positivity and light and love, and exhaling that out as they're inhaling. And that also sets up an emotional connection. And all this happens on a sub-verbal level, and it's very, very powerful. Everything I'm teaching you is very, very powerful, but it's like learning to ride a bicycle. I can tell you it's there, I can tell you it can be done, but if you don't get on the bicycle, you'll never learn how to ride it. And if you don't actually try these things, you'll never figure out actually how they work or whatever. You can't learn them with words. You can't learn them with your heads. You have to learn to do them. But you can, with this breathing technique, reach out and connect with people with the heart. Now, of course, some people will just go into, if any of you listened to the trauma webinar I did, it was a free webinar, and it's posted at our modernherbalmedicine.com. I talked about the trauma vortex and how people can be stuck in these trauma vortexes, and they just are going around and around and around and around and saying the same things over and over again, repeating the same negative story, the same negative blah, 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 blah. And that can get really wearing. I mean, so you practice your reflective listening, you connect, you sense what's going on inside of them, and they're just looping. Okay, so what these techniques I'm going to share with you now are an extension of reflective listening that basically allows you to try to drop them into a deeper level of discussion. Because what you want to, if you can get them out of the verbal brain and down into their feelings and down into from their feelings down into their needs, you can start to help them heal. but you got to get them out of that just verbal looping into feeling their feelings and sensing their needs and going deeper. So this is the purpose of these things is not for you to tell them what you think, not for you to give your labels about what's wrong with them or your interpretation of what they need to do to be fixed. It's actually to help them go to a deeper level so you can help them to heal. Now, so the first of these is observing, and it's really the listening side of observation of facts. And there are two things that you're observing. One is you're looking for emotion. You're noticing when they're talking about something, they show signs of emotion. Because if a person's telling a story about something that happened to them, and they hit a point and their voice elevates a little bit or their eyes get a little watery or whatever, that is saying, I have unresolved emotional trauma around this story that I need to discharge. I need to be able to release this trauma. The second thing is noticing this on a body level. That's noticing it on a heart level. Noticing on a body level is they may make funny little repetitive movements. And as you notice them making those little movements, you can tune in and observe those movements and use those movements to get them in touch with what's happening in their body. And this is not you trying to analyze. Okay, big point here. You're not trying to analyze what it means. You're only trying to call their attention to them and basically give them an opportunity to see if that can help them go deeper. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. Someone's talking about their childhood, and they say something about their father, and you see their eyes get kind of moist and tears well up. So you can go, I noticed that when you talked about your father, you kind of got teary-eyed. Want to share what that's about? I mean, there seems to be some sadness there about your father. Okay? See how that's reflective listening on steroids? Okay? Because now I'm basically, I'm zeroing in right on where their trauma vortexes are, where their unresolved emotional trauma is, and I'm opening the door and saying, if you want to process that, I'm available to do that. Or maybe they're talking about, this happens a lot, they're talking about something that happened with a divorce or something, and you start to hear their voice raise, and you get this little tension in their voice, and you go, I noticed that your voice kind of raised up when you were talking about your ex. It's got some angry feelings there still that you need to work through. Is there some anger still there? Now, that kind of a question is not direct. We are direct. Remember I said asking questions is taking control. Well, in this case, you are taking control because you're trying to get them to stop looping. You're not taking control because you want to steer the conversation in the direction you want it to go. You're taking control because you're trying to open their awareness and see if you can get them to go deeper than they're going and open up on a deeper level. Now, this also can work with bodily movements. Sometimes I notice little funny gestures, legs twitching or hands wringing or whatever. And so I'll say, you're doing this, and I'll actually copy the behavior and mirror it back to them. Now again, this is reflective listening on steroids. I'm literally imitating their behavior, feeding their behavior back to them and saying, do that, and tune in to what's going on inside of you as you're doing that. What is happening in your body? What are you feeling? Because I'm trying to get them to tune into their heart and their body and get out of the words in their head and into what's going on inside of them and tune into that. People aren't used to doing that, and they're not used to having people who actually want them to do that. Most people don't want them to do that. They want them to stay as far away from that. Well, okay, the reason why that's the case is because everybody else is traumatized too. So coming back to the thing of the empathetic resonance in our heart, okay, if someone's getting angry or agitated about something and we have a trauma button inside of us around anger because we had an angry parent who was abusive to us, and so anger scares the H-E-double-L out of us, then as that person starts to get angry, it triggers our own trauma and we are unable to listen, and we want to make that anger go away because we feel uncomfortable with it, because we have unresolved trauma around anger. So see, this is the thing that we encounter with each other all the time in relationships, is that we trigger each other, and we don't know how to take turns listening to help each other work our way out of this. So it takes a lot of training and skill to do that. Now, contradiction. Now, this is an interesting thing because I've done this intuitively and instinctively, but when I read Harvey Jenkins' work, he's the person who does co-counseling, and he has a great little book that introduces his philosophy, The Human Side of Human Beings, which is the basis of his concept of revaluation counseling. But he talks about this technique, and I went, wow, I really get that. What this is lovingly and authentically, and that's really, really critical. Lovingly and authentically challenging a person's negative self. You're challenging their negative beliefs about themselves in order to trigger them going into an emotional discharge. And in other words, another way of saying this is it's seeing past the false negative self that they believe is who they are, and genuinely mirroring back to them the true self of who they really are, or reflecting it back to them. Notice how all of these techniques go on this principle of reflection. You're the mirror. You're not there to analyze, judge, or whatever. You're there to mirror back and give them a chance to see themselves. So skillfully contradicting. Okay, first of all, contradictions are always positive. This is not a technique where someone says, you know, I feel like I'm a really humble person, and you go, no, you're not. That's not contradicting. That's being negative yourself, and that's being judgmental yourself, and that's not what we're talking about. Contradicting is always positive in nature. It's always contradicting a person's negative view of themselves and holding up an appreciation for the good inside of them. Now, one of the things is that we all get so locked into our negative beliefs that literally if someone directly contradicts them, our defensive mechanisms go in gear because we feel like they aren't understanding us, and therefore we basically will defend our negative self-belief. So that's why the other forms of reflective listening, to start to build rapport and make a person feel like you're really listening, are important. But you can do a subtle contradiction technique that basically kind of swipes around their negative self-belief, and if you do this right, it literally just drops them immediately into an emotional discharge. The negative stuff will just come pouring out of them. But all of these must be honest and genuine. If it's not, if you're just doing it phonily, it won't work at all. So here's a kind of practical example I talk about. Somebody goes, you know, I feel so ugly. Okay, I just feel like I'm such an ugly person. If you were to say, no, you're not ugly, that's a negative contradiction. Okay, first of all, everything you just said is negative. No, you're not. Okay, get it? That's not a contradiction. That's an argument. A direct contradiction would be saying, you're beautiful. Now, but see, again, if a person's just saying, I feel so ugly, and you say you're beautiful, that's likely to be such a direct contradiction that it's going to stiffen their defenses. They're going to feel like you didn't hear what I said. But if you use a subtle contradiction, which means they just said that they don't feel attractive, and you look at them and think, was there anything that I find attractive about you? And you go, well, I really think she has beautiful eyes, or I like her hairdo, or I think blah, blah, blah. So you say, well, I think you have a beautiful smile. Okay, so what I've just done is I've just basically contradicted the absoluteness of their thing, and or I can contradict it in a more direct way, saying, I don't see that in you. To me, you're a very beautiful person. Now that is not as direct as you're beautiful, because then they can think, well, you must be stupid, but I really appreciate it. Okay, that's kind of the subconscious dialogue that goes in when you do something like that. But a lot of times that will immediately drop them into emotional discharge. They'll start crying. They'll go, really, I just feel so blah, 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 and all the emotion comes pouring out of them. Or, a lot of times people will say, I feel stupid, or I feel, like I'm just no good, or I just feel like blah, 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 or da, 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 da. So you again use this, contradiction technique. Person says, I feel so stupid. Somebody used to say, that's interesting, because I've always thought of you as very intelligent, or I see you as a very intelligent, capable person. So that's a really, really good technique. And this last technique, which is tuning in, which is part of the core of what emotional healing work is all about, and what trauma recovery is all about, is allowing the person to discharge the emotions that are trapped inside of them so that they can drain away. So what this tuning in thing is something that you do when emotions come to the surface and people try to block or hide them, because we've been so conditioned not to show emotions, that it's not okay to cry, it's not okay to be angry, that there's something wrong with us if we have feelings, that most of the time when people do connect with feelings, they're going to apologize. You'll watch them try to stuff it back down, etc. And what you're going to do is you're going to immediately encourage them to let themselves feel the feelings, to let themselves show the feelings, that that's okay. So this is getting to the core of where you're actually really doing emotional healing work. So you say a person starts to tear up when they're talking about something painful. And they say, I'm sorry, blah, 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 I don't, okay. You say, it's okay. Okay, it's perfectly normal to feel sad about something like that. I mean, if I had a child die, or if my dog got run over by a car or whatever, I'd be sad too. There's nothing wrong with crying about it. Now, what you're doing is this is also a subtle form of contradiction, remember? But it's a positive contradiction. It's saying your self-judgment that you should have to apologize for crying or be embarrassed by crying, I'm telling you, you don't have to be. That it's okay. I'm fine with you crying. It's okay with me. And I often say, just let yourself feel it. Just breathe with it. It's okay. Just tune into that feeling and breathe with it. Just because what you want to do is encourage them to just be with their feelings, not run away from them, not hide from them, not suppress them. Just be with their feelings, okay? Or I've done this where someone's angry about something, and I go, there's nothing wrong with being angry about something like that. It's natural. I mean, when things like that happen, I feel angry or whatever. I mean, it's basically encouraging them to the idea that it's okay that you have feelings. I have feelings too. It's okay. We all have feelings. There's nothing wrong with having feelings. It's okay to express those feelings. Now, this comes to the bottom line. This is one of the things that that as we go through talking about emotional healing, I will be reiterating over and over and over and over and over and over and over again because it's something that we need to really understand. When the big breakthrough I had in physical healing and understanding how to help a person heal on the physical level was the day that I woke up and I realized that the body is always trying to heal itself, and that symptoms are the efforts of the body to maintain its balance when something is distressing it. So I first got this with acute illness, such as, the runny nose, the fever, the diarrhea, the vomiting. I realized were not the disease. They were the efforts of the body to throw off the disease. And if I fought the symptoms, I was fighting the efforts of the body to heal itself. But if I worked with the symptoms, so the basic philosophy I came to understand is that if I assist the body in throwing off what's irritating it, and then instead of continuing to irritate the body, I try to get rid of those influences that are irritating the body and instead focus on things that nourish the body, that's healing. That's healing in a nutshell. Everything I teach about healing, I just told you in that condensed nutshell. That is my core philosophy of healing. Well, when I finally in 1986 had this inspiration about emotional healing, it was like, boom, I saw the same thing. When a person's crying, when they're angry, when they're shouting, or whatever, this is an attempt on their part to heal, to discharge the emotional tension that they're holding on into their body and let go of it. It is not the emotion, it is a release of the emotion, and therefore a doorway to healing and recovery. If I try to interfere with that process, if I try to stop it or make it go away or condemn it or judge it or even palliate it, like there, it's okay, don't cry, or you shouldn't feel angry about that, or da 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 da, or you need to any of that kind of stuff, I'm actually disrupting the healing process. Now, the problem is this, okay? I'm traumatized too. So therefore, when someone is emotionally discharging an emotion that I don't know how to handle, I am really, really uncomfortable with that because I'm trying to deal with my own feelings at the same time. The key is to just allow it to be. And this kind of came up with some questions that were asked in the first session, so this has helped me kind of organize my thoughts. Okay, so you're talking about this and it's very painful and it brings up pain inside of you. Okay, if you can just allow yourself to it's okay if you're getting teary-eyed as they're talking about something sad. One time, one of my friends was telling me about something that she'd been through that had just been really painful and traumatizing for her, and I cared about her so much. I just was hurting for her, and tears welled up in my eyes because I felt so much pain, so much compassion. And she looked up at me and saw that I was crying, and she was just like, she said, "Thank you." And she wrote a poem for me and said that was the most healing experience she'd ever had, when her friend loved her enough to cry with her. That was a great lesson to me. One of the things when I first tried to do this, and some of the people that were working with me when we were first trying to do this, we found something really interesting. As we're working with someone else, if an issue came up for them that we had a very similar issue, it immediately would bring our emotional issue to the surface. But we were training ourselves to be there and be unconditionally accepting and loving for the person. So what we were realizing is, this is my stuff, and if you understand the process, that's actually a great blessing, because what it really is doing is giving you an opportunity to heal as they're healing, because you are able to see your own emotions. So there were a lot of times when I did emotional healing work with people, and one of my friends commented that this happened to him a couple of times too, where after we were done, we went off and we bawled or cried or did whatever we did to process through our own emotions, because we didn't want to dump our emotions onto the person we were trying to help, but it brought our emotions to the surface and triggered an emotional release for us. A lot of my emotional release doesn't take place with other people. Quite honestly, it takes place because the person I tend to talk to a lot is God, and I pray and I let God know exactly how I'm feeling, and a lot of times have a lot of breakthroughs in terms of getting emotional discharge for myself. But the fact is that the emotional release is really important, but we have a hard time doing it because we have so much trauma inside of ourselves. That's why the taking turns is important. When it's your turn to help someone else, you have to kind of like recognize, this is my stuff, and it can allow you to, if it allows you to empathize with the other person, that's great. If it makes you judge them, then you need to do some work on your own. This all takes practice. None of this is something that you're going to master overnight. I've been working on this a lot of years. I've been working on learning to be a good listener for a lot of years. One of the things that tells me I've at least partially succeeded in that is the number of people who've told me that they've shared things with me that they've never shared with any other person in their entire life. They've opened up parts of themselves that that they never let anybody else see. And I hold that as a very sacred honor, a very sacred privilege that people have trusted me enough to open up things to me. But having done a lot of work myself and being comfortable with my own feelings, being comfortable with crying, being comfortable with feeling angry, being comfortable with feeling afraid, being comfortable with my own emotions allows me to be comfortable when other people are expressing their emotions. But I couldn't do that if I felt responsible for fixing their emotions. I am not responsible for fixing their emotions. What I see is inside of them, they have the capacity to deal with their emotions. It's not my responsibility to fix them. I can't actually fix their emotions. All I can do is help them discharge the emotional tension and find their solutions within inside themselves. When I'm looking at it that way, I don't have any burden of responsibility as I'm listening, which makes me feel like this is like a huge weight on my shoulders. So I can be completely empathetic and open because I'm just another human being with my own problems, listening to another human being with their own problems and giving them my compassionate attention and giving them the opportunity to speak and vocalize and put out what they haven't been able to maybe put out or let go of or discharge. That's the core of emotional healing. So what I would encourage you to do is to practice these skills. Go through this presentation and practice this. Practice it with your kids, with your spouse, with your clients, whatever, because it's in practicing it that it becomes second nature to you.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, which was taken from our member archives at stephenhorn.com. Please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel. To support our efforts to get more training like this, join our member program. The links are found below.